Okay, you can see it. Great. So thank you, everyone. And in fact, a lot of what I'm going to say was already said in the earlier session. So maybe I will have to take less time, which might be a good thing, considering all of this. So this session is supposed to be about why are we all taking the debt in the first place, right? What's the reason for the balance of payment stress that causes so many low and middle income countries to take on debt and then have these cycles and this crisis and the stress and so on and so forth. And there are many reasons, of course. I mean, there are what are called the kind of traditional balance of payments constraints. What we used to say were the structural deficits in the course of industrialization and development and so on. Then there's the whole issue that when countries open up to trade and finance, but particularly to trade, it's actually made this deficit problem significantly worse. It was supposed to make it better, but it didn't. It's actually added to it because typically our own political economy means that we are very import intensive, not just for investment goods, but also for consumption goods. And that tends to worsen the balance of payments problems. We all know that there's excessive dependence on a few primary commodities usually, or at least a lot of commodity concentration in exports and a lot of price volatility in those exports. And then, of course, there's the whole, especially recently, the big increases in major import prices, especially food and fuel. Then there are the other typical factors, the different kinds of shocks, the climate shocks, the terms of trade shocks, the interest rate shocks, and so on. But what I'm going to focus on is how, in fact, the debt stress itself results from the financial system. In other words, in addition to all of these, we have debt stress that is coming from international financial flows. And that's because low and middle income countries are integrating into global capital markets on a very unequal footing. I mean, this is what Jerry talked about with the pyramid, was it? And ladder. The whole currency hierarchy literature is about that. There is a lot of literature about how there's a fundamental inequality between countries in global capital markets. And of course, that became very evident, ironically, in a period when suddenly a whole bunch of countries got access to financial markets, which they hadn't got before. The phenomenon of emerging markets was created to bring in some of those middle-income countries. Then you got frontier markets, which were the ones that were completely excluded from global financial markets before that. And therefore, you had a sort of easing of supply, basically, and a shifting of the pattern. You went from aid to FDI, to credit, and particularly more recently to bonds. And that meant that we are hugely impacted by macroeconomic policies in the advanced countries. Again, nobody here needs to know anything. I mean, everyone knows about that, right? The spillover effects of that. So the point is this, that now global capital flows are not demand-driven, they are supply-driven, okay? And so it's not the current account driving the capital account, it's the other way around. It's the capital account driving changes in the current account. And this has been true definitely from the 90s onwards, but there was a traditional debt cycle that began, well, actually from the 70s, 80s, 90s onwards. And the traditional debt cycle was that basically you get chosen by global capital markets, so you get a lot of debt and capital inflows, and your finance minister gets on the cover of Business Week or whatever it is, and FT is praising you, and Davos is praising you, and you get a lot of capital inflows that cause the real exchange rate to appreciate. And domestically, this shifts incentives from tradables to non-tradables. Over time, that necessarily means you're getting current account deficits, which are matching your capital inflows, or at least coming close to your capital inflows. And at some point, the global markets look at you and say, oh my goodness, very large current account deficit. And you get an outflow, which can have a particular episodic cause, or it can just be a generalized thing, or it can be that your neighbor has had a balance of payments problem, so the financiers of the world just decide to leave you. Now, this was the pattern until about, let's say, maybe the global financial crisis. But subsequently, we've actually been moving to a situation where we're much more driven by the macroeconomic policies of advanced economies, not our own. So it's really what's going on in the advanced economies that drives the accessibility to global capital. And of course, that same set of macro policies, particularly the loose money policies, fueled massive financial activity, which has increased volatility in food and fuel markets. what that has meant for all of us recipient economies is that we're terrified of the possibility of capital flight. And this has had a major impact on fiscal expansion, which of course then means a lower growth path as well. For example, during the COVID pandemic, as you can see, the high-income countries, the blue line, increased their government expenditure very significantly, on average by about 12% of GDP. Some countries like the US, of course, leader of the pack, 55% of all the fiscal stimulus in the world. Middle-income countries, the orange line, much less so. And remember, it's also already a lower share of GDP on average. But the low-income countries, it's absolutely flat. They didn't increase any spending during the pandemic, which is shocking, right? When you think about it, this is the period when you really needed significant increases. Nonetheless, their primary deficits go up. The gray line at the bottom, low-income countries, despite not increasing spending, obviously revenues fall, so the deficit goes up anyway. But the deficit goes up hugely for high-income countries, and moderately so also for middle-income countries, for the pandemic year in particular. And if you can look at the general government gross debt, again, big increase for the advanced economies, about 21 percentage points. Moderate increase for the middle-income countries, really almost flat. I mean, a slight increase and then it stays flat over the subsequent period for low-income countries. But guess who gets hammered by the capital markets? Not the advanced economies who've been so fiscally profligate during the pandemic. That's the blue line. This is the spread over the US Fed rate. The average spread, the reason the blue line looks flat is because it is. It stayed below 1 basis point. Can you imagine that was the average of the spread, 1 basis point. Low and middle income countries together, on the other hand, it goes up once during the pandemic to about 480 basis points on average. It goes up to nearly 700 basis points during the Ukraine war and the aftermath of that. And some low-income countries, it has actually gone up to 1,100 basis points. Despite being terribly cautious and disciplined and well-behaved and doing all the stuff that the IMF tells them to do. Recently, in fact, it's really expectations that are driving these, which become self-fulfilling. So here's the point. It's not to do with fundamentals, so-called, but once capital markets decide that you are not safe, then the expectations drive it completely. But the expectations are not, shall we say, independent. I mean, emerging Europe, it goes up dramatically, but it comes down as well. Whereas in emerging Asia as well, it's in sub-Saharan Africa, in the Middle East in particular, this is a very, very high range, and in which some countries, as you can see, can you see those little black line thingy bobs? Those are the points, yeah, the extreme points, and you can see that there are some countries that have had really significant, very, very dramatic increases in spreads over the US Fed rate. Remember, we're talking in the thousands here, 2,000, 2,500, very, very large spreads. But there's a really interesting recent paper by two economists from Paris School of Economics, Gaston Nivas and Alice Sodano. They have shown that what we used to call the US exorbitant privilege is really the rich world's exorbitant privilege. So here is the excess yield on net foreign assets. And this is not just on, government bonds, et cetera. It's all capital flows. You're looking at the difference between what you are getting in and what you're paying out. And as you can see, the Eurozone is doing rather well. The United States is doing very well. And Japan is doing extremely well. Okay? They're all having very, very large, significant excess yields on their net foreign assets. On the other hand, the BRICS as a whole, that's the black dotted line, negative yields for a very long time. We are now talking about more than 2 decades of negative yield. And this is true of China as well, significantly negative yields. Russia, no surprise that it's negative yields. But this is not because they are riskier, okay? It's not because, these capital from rich countries is going into much, much riskier assets. And I think we've got a very clear idea of that from the last session, right? When Marina told us about that differential and how it's played out even for the debt-stressed countries. But because they hold really low interest debt in the rich countries, because they have international reserve currencies. That's the whole point. It's entirely because of what you could call a seigniorage gain or loss. Yeah, it's the power of the seignior, the term, but essentially. And what's also interesting is that these costs of seigniorage are very significant, even for countries that are supposedly successful, the middle-income countries. So this is India, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand, and this is actually data from UNCTAD, one of the trade and development reports, which is actually showing you that this is a share of GDP, the kinds of losses that are being made. So in Indonesia, it's 4.1%, for example. In Malaysia, in the latest period, after 2010 to 2018. In Thailand, it's as more than 5% of GDP, which, by the way, is more than all forms of net capital inflow put together, just the seigniorage losses. So it's quite dramatic, the extent to which even middle-income successful countries. Also remember, Malaysia and Thailand are current account surplus countries. They are stable, quote-unquote, democracies, etc. Right? So there's no risk in Thailand and Malaysia. Nonetheless, there's this kind of spread. So it's clearly not justified by fundamentals. Not because of greater risk, not because of the likelihood of expropriation in certainly Thailand, Malaysia, etc. Not because of higher volatility, not because, which Avi was suggesting in the last session, not because of currency depreciation. In fact, both currencies have appreciated for Thailand and Malaysia. But they have been making capital gains. Investors from rich countries have been making capital gains for more than 3 decades now. It's really not even because of the lower rates of return on just the public debt in rich countries, which is very low, right? I mean, US Fed rate is very low. Because private debt shows exactly similar patterns. I haven't put the data here, but you will find that it's exactly similar. So what is it? It is a privilege created by power. Not just geopolitical and military power, but also the power to influence the international financial institutions, to influence the credit rating agencies, to influence global rule setting in many different ways, including in taxation rules through the OECD, to lobby for and ensure policies in the low-income countries, which would be more advantageous to that foreign capital. So it's all of that power which is creating that differential. And I would argue that this is a systemic flaw in the pattern of global capital movements, which is really one of the reasons for the balance of payment stress. Just the very fact that any debt you're taking on, you're just paying so much more for. And the point that was being discussed in the last session, the international financial institutions have actually added to this. So here's the total net financial flows, excluding China, because we all know China is a whole different ballgame. Other than China, low and middle income countries, and you can see that 2023 already it's negative, but in 2024 it's projected to decline to about negative 70 billion. So an outflow from the entire group of low and middle income countries. And the international financial institutions have made it worse. They've been pro-cyclical. The World Bank Group is actually spent less in 2023 than they did. I think, was it Kevin and Marina who had the chart up to 2022 when it was going up slightly? Well, 2023, it is significantly down. 6 billion less for the World Bank Group, 19 billion less for the IMF, almost 6 billion for the Asian Development Bank, about 2.5 billion for the Asian Infrastructure Bank, and more than 1 billion for the IADB, the one that Avinash is hoping to push into a major. So this is a period of debt stress. It is a period of major downswing, and we find the IFIs being significantly pro-cyclical. So what does that tell us? It tells us that, listen, I mean, in a way, the impolite way of putting it is that integration into global capital markets, I've said it's a major systemic cause of current debt distress. I mean, here I can just tell you it's a mug's game, right? It doesn't help you. You don't necessarily get the benefit. These debt cycles force you into trajectories in which you have to pay much more because of the fact that you have to pay higher interest rate for your debt, and it's completely dependent on what's happening in the advanced economies, so you have no control over the way in which this is going to influence your debt sustainability. So I would argue that low and middle income countries need to reduce or avoid such integration. I think in the morning we were talking about these different options, and Jerry mentioned that one of the ways is withdraw. And I'm saying, yes, withdraw, because so far there is really no evidence that this integration has generated more resources for development in our parts of the world. Thanks.